Okay, with that, we'll begin this today's topic. The topic for today is inspired by some guy out in somewhere who told someone that they make Starbucks coffee orders and they arrange it that the Starbucks delivery through Uber or something of the like arrives on Shabbos morning at their homes. So last week I tried my best to debunk the myth that this is okay, but it still didn't convince anybody. So they said, Rabbi, you're making so many problems. I'm trying to find solutions. You're making problems. So I have some more problems. For me, they're solutions so that I can sleep well at night and knowing no one here is ordering from Starbucks straight to their house on Shabbos morning. But to be more serious note, it is related to a topic that I wanted to talk about anyways, which is very fascinating in the Lumdis and fascinating from a practical standpoint and how the poskim interact with contemporary issues, which is really our weekly discussion, which I think is just a fascinating thing. So even if one is not contemplating having a Starbucks order come into their house on Shabbos morning, but I think it's interesting about having Jewish businesses. I didn't check. I don't know how one would check. Maybe if you were on a different time zone to check, each business. But I was told that BNY, which is one of the famous video, B&H. Sorry, not BNY. BNY was the original kosher supermarket in Passaic when I was a kid, before Kosher Connection, before Aisle 1, all these things. But B&H, I was told that their website does not work on Shabbos. I don't know. I couldn't check it, but I was told it doesn't work on Shabbos. I didn't check. As I was saying, maybe if I went to a different time zone and just at that point get a life, right? At that point, but somehow Hasidim and video just goes together. But they have this huge store. It's like a very well-known business. They have a website, so I was told they keep it off. So the question before we get to that, so I want to talk about today. That we're going to put the issue to bed, the issue of the Starbucks. Then we're going to move on to online business and websites and talk about that. So number one, as Daryl pointed out, Rabbi Doctor, which one first? What? Yeah. Marasayan, exactly. We're not going to deal with Marasayan today. Maybe we'll do it a different week. But there is a Marasayan issue, just to touch on it briefly. If people see a delivery truck going to your house, it's probably an issue. Now, you may say, maybe, we have lots of Amazon packages coming to our homes all the time on Shabbos, and maybe I didn't order it, as we mentioned last time. I didn't order it for Shabbos, so maybe it's not a Maras Ayin issue, but I would say it's a Maras Ayin question. Then, we talked about last week, I'm just recapping for a few people who weren't here, we talked about the tshuva that was discussing, and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who discussed the newspaper Shaila, which was if you order a newspaper that comes only on Shabbos, we tried to eke out a heter based on the fact that they're printing many thousands and thousands of newspapers, and the fact that they have a few from people Jewish people who are purchasing it is not really adding to it. It's riboy b'shu'urim. It was not, they didn't have you in mind, etc., and it was batal, berov, a lot of different things we had to say last week to try to eke out a heter for that. And based on that, some wanted to say, I think it was Tzvi, maybe Meir, I don't remember, in the group, that they're not cooking it for me because they don't put up a new pot of coffee, they're just making coffee, and the fact that I'm ordering it now is not, they don't go per cup. So therefore, it could be like the case of the newspaper manufacturer, that they're making these thousands of newspapers, and it's batal barov, etc. So I just wanted to respond to that point, which is, it's a very big difference.
Shabbos you're getting coffee, it comes every day of the week.
Let's say you're just ordering for Shabbos. If it's every day of the week is a different heter, which we're going to get to. Every day of the week could be a different heter. The newspaper, we tried to say maybe even if you're just ordering the weekly paper, which is we said is not, you shouldn't do it. But we're just trying to see if you can make an argument for a heter, for an allowance. Maybe you could apply that to here. And I would say even that there's a lot of steps you got to go through to allow the newspaper case. But even if you're going to say that that's mutter, I think there's a difference between the the pot of coffee and the newspapers, because you have thousands and thousands of newspapers, and the fact that maybe they're not going per cup, but my response is it's much of a smaller amount that at some point you're increasing, you're making an order, you're increasing the coffee that they're making. So that would be a problem of, again, like you mentioned, Amir L'Nachri, asking a non-Jew to do malacha for you. However, even if you're not convinced by any of those arguments, there's a issue which I cannot see how you're going to get around. For you, it'll be a problem. For me, it's a solution, as I mentioned. Mm-hmm. You can't get around this problem, and that is the problem of kinyan b'Shabbos. Kinyan b'Shabbos, which is our major discussion for today, is making a transaction that takes place on Shabbos is usher. You're not allowed to make a transaction, even if you set up the transaction beforehand. As we shall see, this may be debated, which is our question, really. All right, you're setting up a transaction to happen on Shabbos from one property to somebody else's. You're taking money is going from your account, assuming that we're going to treat credit cards and digital and all that stuff. We're going to treat it as a transfer, which is debated in halacha. But let's just assume it's considered a transfer of property from one property to another. That is a kinyan b'Shabbos. That is usher. Now, where does this prohibition come from? So let's begin. The source is, you have a source sheet in front of you. The source is a Gemara in Beitza.
Sorry, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to bring it up or not, but what about the fundamental?
You always get to the end of the shiur before we start the shiur.
Sorry, I hope not.
I'm sure you're going to. Yes, go ahead.
No, the fundamental.
No, I love it. I love
issue about Shabbos.
Oh,
It's not in the spirit of
the
Shabbos.
Ramban. We'll see the Ramban. Okay, very good. Very good. So, the idea of not Shabbos stick, people think, it's just a chumrah, it's just a sociological narishkeit. No, we'll see, according to the Ramban, there actually could be a din da'araisa of something called Shabbos stick. So we'll see soon what that is. So we will get there. Thank you, Chaim. The Magid is back, or maybe we have to find another Chaim nickname for you, because the Magid, Chaim, I don't know, we'll find it. The Chaim. Okay. But, so, the question is, where does this Isra of Kinyan b'Shabbos come from? So the Gemara in Beitza tells us, actually things that you would have thought would be mutter, like donating things to the Beis HaMikdash, or other things that, making things usher, even though those things you'd think are maybe mutter, but there's a problem with them, and that is that it's Gezerah, the Gemara says, Gezerah mishum mekach umemkar, that you're not allowed to make a transaction from your property, as Rashi explains, to the Beis HaMikdash, even though you're making a donation, even though it's a holy thing, but you're transferring from one rishus to another rishus, from the rishus of Hedyot to the rishus of Hektish, and that's a problem similar because it's similar to Mekach u'Memkar, business transactions, a buyer and a seller. You have the donator, giving to the Beis HaMikdash. It's transferring the property. Now, why is that a problem? So Rashi explains. I think we talked about this pasuk in Yeshaya last week. The pasuk in Yeshaya says, "Mimso cheftecha v'daber davar." If you're going to go and do your own affairs and look after your own ways, you should not do that, or striking bargains, or etc. Don't do those types of things. This is the source, Rashi says, for the problem of business on Shabbos. Or the other issue with doing business on Shabbos, where we're not really even going to talk about this whole question of why doing business on Shabbos is problematic, but a different issue that Rashi brings up is maybe you'll come to write a shtar, maybe you'll come to write something down, because you're doing business, and like anyone who's doing business, you have to keep a record of it. There's no, nowadays everything collapses when you have, when like Rogers had a problem. I remember I was trying to buy something at a store with a debit card. I told this story before, Josh? I'm getting repetitive.
No, I'm just remembering it because it happened to us all, right?
I was trying to buy something at a store with a debit card, and the guy's like, "What do you mean? The Rogers thing?" I'm like, "Yeah." So apparently everything is in the cloud. There's like there's no way to do anything anymore without internet. But it used to be, I'm only 33, but it used to be the Altaheim in the olden days, Amal, a long time ago, that you would write things down. You would write down records. So that's the problem of doing business on Shabbos. And Rashi asked the question, well, how could that be? It's a gzera l'gzera. You're saying you can't do business because maybe you're going to end up, writing something. So he says that is 2 steps removed, but he says, no, it's all kula chada gezerah, it's all one gezerah. We're not going to get into the details of all of that because he basically, it's two steps. But that's a side question. We're going to take it as a assumption at this point for the purpose of our shir today that doing business on Shabbos is prohibited. Why it is, it's not going to be so important for us. Why? Which brings us to another source, which was the source that Chaim said. And that is that maybe, even if there's no problem specifically of business, but there's something called Shabbosdik, something that's Shabbosdik. Now, Shabbosdik may be a Yiddishism, but the Ramban says the Torah refers to Shabbos as Shabbaton, not the Shabbaton that we know of now, that made famous by NCSY or whatever, whoever started it in the 50s or whatever it was, the history of the Shabbaton. But Shabbaton is referred to, Shabbos is referred to as Shabbaton. Also, other Yomim Tovim are oftentimes referred to as a Shabbaton. So the Ramban says in source number 4, he says, even if you could spend all Shabbos or Yontif not doing any malacha explicitly, you could end up violating this concept of Shabbaton. So he says as follows. What does this mean? So he actually says this is maybe even a source for the concept of a shvus, of the rabbis coming and making certain things prohibited, but he says something else as well. Nearly, source number 4, Shehamedrash hazeh lomar, this understanding, this teaching, she'nitzavinu min haTorah, that we are required from the Torah, commanded by the Torah, to make it a Shabbaton, to make it a day of rest. Liod lanu menucha biyontiv. You have to be you have to make the day a day of rest on Yontif, and he applies the same thing to Shabbos also. Afil midvarim she'ein on malacha, even on things that you can't say that they're a malacha. You can't say there's a malacha. So, what are those things? And he gives a lot of examples. Lo sheyatriach sheyitrach kol hayom limdod atfuos v'lishkol haperos v'hamatonos. All day long, you're going to be measuring your grain and weighing your produce. Today, it would be, I guess, checking your stocks or your investments online, whatever it is. You could spend all day doing things that are not malachos, but then you're going to come to a situation where your Shabbos and your Yontiv is not Shabbosdik. You've avoided it. You've created loopholes. There's no malacha. That's why the Torah specifically goes out of its way to say it should be a Shabbaton. The way the Rabban understands it, Shiyeh lo yom shvisa umenucha lo yom toreach. Your day should not be a day of tircha. Your day should not be a day of work, of toil. It should be a day of rest. Some people say that don't be matriach me, Rabbi. I want to get a heter, right? That's not what we mean. But it means that you should have a day where you are less active, less doing things of the week. This is not a uvda dechol type of argument, which it may have some parallels to it. But Ramban is saying a din d'oraisa. He's saying a din d'oraisa, a biblical commandment that Shabbos and Yontiv should be days of rest. How you define it, where's the line, my white shirt, my blue shirt, you could go very far with this idea. I don't think we have to go so far. The Ramban tells us what he's talking about. He's talking about doing business. He's talking about measuring your stuff. You can't pin me down on a specific thing, but doing business. The Torah understood that we would look for a way to circumvent the existing malachos, and the Torah therefore goes out of its way to add on this idea of a Shabbaton, which is similar to what Chaim was saying, that it's not Shabbosdik. I'm not talking about wearing a blue shirt on Shabbos. You can wear a blue shirt on Shabbos, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe you have to talk about people who are in shidduchim or different. That's a different question. But
Which seminary?
Yeah, exactly. I want her to go to a seminary that they're going to tell her she could marry someone who's working. So therefore, I'm going to wear a blue shirt. Just don't be normal. Yeah.
This is Doraisa. This is Doraisa the way it's doing.
Doraisa. Din Doraisa. Yeah, it's a Din Doraisa. Yes, exactly. Okay. So,
Isn't
yeah.
How do they categorize Shabbos?
Isn't the idea of like a Shabbos atmosphere though based on Pasuk and Yeshayahu itself, and specifically it gives 3. It's been a minute since I learned this, but didn't they give 3 examples? One of which is actually like halicha.
Everyone
So
says like, oh, whatever.
isn't it a stretch to take it from there into like what we're talking about?
Well, the Ramban is a different source. I mean, the Ramban is using the words
It's a real thing.
Yom Shabbason or Yom Shabbaton, and that's what he's understanding based on the Chazal. But that's his understanding of a different pasuk. You're right. The Shaya is probably Durabanan, and you're right. The Gemara gives different drushos for that, and it's all probably an asmachta, likely like we mentioned last time, right? It's not a din daraisa. Okay, so it could be two problems with we just mentioned with the doing business weekday activities on Shabbos, even if there's no malacha. Number one, we mentioned kinyan b'Shabbos, and number two, we mentioned this idea of Shabbaton. One would be D'Rabbanan, as Josh pointed out. One would be D'Oraisa. Now, the question is: does an online transaction is that considered a kinyan? Do we look at that as a kinyan? I mentioned to you that purchasing with a credit card is, but do we look at an online kinyan as a real transfer in halacha? And then the number two question we have to deal with is, what about the profits? Even if we could come out with a heter and say the online transaction, maybe not a full transaction, etc., we'll have to see. If you put it into place, like I mentioned, maybe a heter, if you start the process before Shabbos. But then there's another problem, which is, what do you do with the earnings? What do you do with the profit? It's called schar Shabbos. Schar Shabbos is off limits, is not allowed to be. So that's a problem. So this is an interesting thing. I just want to also think, I mentioned, I try to tell you all my sources, but I saw, first of all, there's an article by Rabbi Chaim Jachter. I saw an article in David Lichtenstein's headlines. I found some sources in the Penini Halacha, Rabbi Lesher Melamed, a number of things, Rav Shlomo Zalman. So we'll see. But everyone's dealing with the same basic sources here, which is fascinating that we can use some of the tshuvas of over the last hundreds of years to apply to an online transaction, which I think is just fascinating. So let's begin. So I'm not necessarily going to read everything for you inside, but I'll just tell you that this Rabbi Kiva Eger, in source number 5, Shelos Utshuvas Rabbi Kiva Eger, Mahadura Kama Siman Kuf Nun Test, is a very important source which many of the posts can deal with. And Rabbi Kiva Eger is dealing with a fascinating Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, if a Kohen Gadol dies on Yom Kippur, if a Kohen Gadol's wife dies on Yom Kippur, so the Yerushalmi says he is allowed to go and marry another wife, because we know that a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and serve in the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur unless he's married. So they actually set aside a backup, but he's allowed to go and marry, according to the Yerushalmi, another woman on Yom Kippur. How could he do such a thing? That is a halachic transaction, or it's a status change, which we don't look at it as only that, right? We know marriage is not just about the money, contrary to what some people would say. But there's a transaction that's happening in halacha, right? We look at it as a kinyan, and that's a kinyan on Yom Kippur, which we know is the same malachas that are asur on Shabbos are asur on Yom Kippur.
Is there an asay dochalos asay that kicks in, even in that first Gemara that you talked about?
So it's interesting. The Yerushalmi doesn't go that far, because, as I mentioned before, the din of a kinyan b'Shabbos is an isur d'Rabbanan, so you don't even need to go to asay dochalos asay. The Yerushalmi says ein shvus b'mikdash. There's no problems of rabbinic enactments in the mikdash. I guess they would have a wedding in the Beis HaMikdash, in the mikdash, or in the premises, or maybe it's ancient b'mikdash to allow them to go into the mikdash. I don't know, but maybe that's a nice trivia for anyone who wants to. When do we have a wedding in the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur? That'd be
I remember the Gemara. I think they got married before, and it was. I forgot what the word is.
Made a Tanai.
It's rare, it's.
The Gemara is, so we're going to ask. We're going to ask this question. The Yerushalmi, the Rabbi Kiva Eger asks this question of why the Yerushalmi didn't say what David was saying. Why didn't we say that he should get married before Yom Kippur and make a condition, right, that it should only take effect on Yom Kippur if his wife passes away, right?
Yeah.
In other words, we know Midoraisa you're allowed to make. So that's a different question. In Yerushalmi's times, there was no Takana Rabbeinu Gershom. Let's just assume you can marry more than one wife. So the Yerushalmi, this is just, it's all, these types of things, these havaminas and these like questions of why didn't the Gemara say? I don't think it would have even reached the halachic, practical realm. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger brings it down. So because Rabbi Akiva Eiger asked it, it gets into the discussion. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger wants to know, why didn't the Yerushalmi suggest the following? Why doesn't he marry her al tanai? Why doesn't he have the following condition? Marry her before, again, the second woman, just in case, and on condition, if his first wife dies, that the marriage would take effect on Yom Kippur. Why doesn't he do that? Because
Make the kinyan.
that, it seems to be, Rabbi Akiva Eiger is saying, it seems to be that would be better because it's taking, the kinyan is starting from before Yom Kippur on some level, even though it has a Tanai attached to it. So the fact that he asked, why didn't we say that? Okay, follow this. It's a little bit complicated. Shows that there's no difference in the Gemara's eyes between starting a kinyan with a Tanai on it and doing a kinyan itself. They're both Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. We can see some of the lashon of this inside if you want. He was asked this question about a kinyan b'Shabbos. He's dealing with a different question. I'm not going to get into that, but basically, he was asked this question about a gemiras kinyan be'erev Shabbos that was me'achshav, that would take effect from now and then finish on Shabbos, or maybe there was a Tanai. There was one question he was asked: if you made a condition on a particular mechira, on a particular transaction, the condition was, I don't know, if when you go and walk outside, it would take effect. And if you walked outside on Shabbos, would that be okay? Or the other case was really our case, which is I'm making a Tanai that it should take effect on Shabbos. He was asked this question: should it work? So he wants to say from Yerushalmi, he wants to prove that we consider it to be a kinyan even if it started to take effect before Shabbos. He says, Amar Yerushalmi dehatiu shvus b'mikdash. Why do we have to say shvus b'mikdash? However, below shvus, we could go ahead and have a different case where there would be no violation of a rabbinic kinyan, or a kinyan that's for violation of a rabbinic prohibition. Make a Tanai that if his first wife dies, the second marriage would take effect on it would be on condition. We see that there will be no revach in this. It will not help us. Both cases would be a kinyan on Shabbos. In other words, marrying a woman on Shabbos is a kinyan. On Yom Kippur is what the Yerushalmi is talking about. That would be a shvus, which is allowed because ain't shvus b'mikdash. The same idea, the same halachic category will be if you said this whole condition thing, even though you could have thought, Rabbi Akiva Eiger he doesn't speak out each point, but the post can explain, this is what his question was. He was saying maybe you could say that the kinyan starts before Shabbos. You gave her a ring and you said, I'll deny that if my first wife dies, I'm going to marry you and it should take effect on Yom Kippur. Very romantic proposition. Maybe that starts the process before, which would make it a better case. Why didn't Yerushalmi use that case? To avoid the problem of Shvus B'Mikdash? The answer is it's also Shvus B'Mikdash, because the kinyan is taking effect on Shabbos itself. Or you could say, no, maybe there's nothing that starts, it doesn't start, it was completely, took effect on Yom Kippur itself, and therefore it would not be any difference. But we see clearly that Rabbi Akiva Eiger considered a kinyan that was started or that was set up before Shabbos to take effect on Shabbos, in this case it was Yom Kippur, is problematic. So now, bring it home to the case that we're dealing with right now. If you set something up on Erev Shabbos, like a website, or you make an order, and that order takes effect on Shabbos, it will be a problem. It will be usher, because it's a kinyan on Shabbos. Now, there are other poskim who disagree with this.
What kind of kinyan is it?
Which kinyan? Marriage?
When you're buying something online.
That's a classic kinyan. You're buying something. What do you mean?
Transference. Cash is not a kinyan.
By non-Jews it is.
By non-Jews.
By non-Jews. Let's just take as assumption right now that you're dealing with a non-Jewish Starbucks owner. Your you're making an order.
When? On Friday? What are you doing about?
You're making the order. You're setting it up,
Set up.
and then so you paid him, and then he is transferring that coffee to you on Shabbos. Or alternatively, you could say, well, we'll get to it in a moment. You have an online website. People can buy stuff on your website, and they go onto your website. You're the website owner. You're not actively doing anything, but he's purchasing from your website on Shabbos. So I set it up. I set up my website on Erev Shabbos. It's open on Shabbos. He makes the purchase. He does the transfer.
But can't
So we
you
could have a
argue-
different heter maybe about being passive, which we'll get to. But
Can't you
yeah.
argue that the actual kinyan is not the purchase,
yeah,
but the actual physical, either you receive
could
a
make that
service
argument, maybe.
or a product.
but that would be worse then. For the
No,
Starbucks case, it's worse
I
because
know-
he's
I know
bringing
you-
it to your house.
But I know you say shul is different, but that's the exact same thing when you pay a caterer to, and it's actually
No,
a Jewish
it's
caterer.
no. We're dealing with something else. We'll get to that soon. Most of the time, it's called schar havla, which we're going to deal with for schar
But
Shabbos.
the person's paying the caterer for the food.
They
and
pay
the guy's
them-
giving you the food on Shabbos.
You have to pay them before Shabbos, or they have to do something for you during the week, or you pay them by month or by week. You can't pay them for Shabbos. Can't pay them for Shabbos. Whether people are doing it, they don't know.
Paying up our mitzvah at shul on Shabbos, you're not paying for Shabbos.
No, you pay
Preparation.
for things that they do before Shabbos, and then it's something called havla.
That's the heter, but I mean, technically-
I'll show you the
Delivering
sources.
The food is the same thing. You're delivering the food on Shabbos.
There
You're
may-
delivering the coffee on Shabbos.
One second. If you have this is what Daryl was suggesting. If you have a daily order of Starbucks, again, this is not going to work because they charge you per thing. It's not like you make a deal with Starbucks. I pay you this amount every week, and then the Shabbos is included. But in theory, if you could do a what's called havla, you could avoid the schar b'Shabbos. But here, we're talking about a transaction that's happening on a person's website. Let's just use the website case. It's not like we have a deal and it's a weekly thing. This is a one-time transfer. I don't know how you're going to get out of that. It's a transfer happening
I understand,
on
but what I'm
Shabbos.
saying, let's say someone goes on, let's say I have an online website, and someone goes on to my website and
Yeah.
buys a case.
Yes.
Okay?
A Jew or a non-Jew?
A Jew.
A Jew.
A Jew, okay.
Even better or
Hold on,
worse.
hold on.
You're competing with my website.
Hold on, this case
Yeah.
is not gonna be delivered until Sunday.
Right, so yes, that's what I was about to ask them. Good
So what
question.
happened?
So we're
There's
gonna.
no
When did the
kinyan.
kinyan happen?
There's no kinyan.
So it could be different for a Jew or a non. It could be different for a Jew or a non-Jew. A non-Jew, the kinyan is the money transfer for a
Why?
non-Jew. That's how it works.
Why?
In,
But there's the.
For a Jew, it's different.
There's no cash.
Kinyanim is
there's
different.
No nothing. These days everything's
For-
automatic
I hear-
online. It's automatic. The actual.
I-
if I receive this,
Yeah.
once I pick it up, now I've made a kinyan.
Well, you have the goyim, but what if you're a goyim?
So there's a couple things. You're right. There is a very complicated piece here, which we're kind of skipping over, which is how do we look at online transactions? Is when does the kinyan happen? We're just now assuming that that's a kinyan. You could argue it's not, but then it gets a little more complicated. So let's say he messes up your order. You gave him money, and he'll say, "So what? There was no kinyan." And you're saying, "What are you talking about? I gave you money. That doesn't matter." So then, whatever. You gave him a loan. So whatever, it's a little bit complicated. I hear what you're saying.
The
But right now,
transaction part.
for argument's sake,
But the second part. of the
We're just-
transaction.
Exactly.
we're just
It's not
dealing.
a transfer, but you
You
didn't
could
get
say that there's one step of a transaction. You could say that. We're just, for argument's sake, we're just using
Well, what about this
that as a
thing?
transaction.
We didn't get an answer yet.
Yeah.
Paying a caterer for bar mitzvah lunch.
I don't. I said there's no way. I don't think there's any way that they're going and paying them for the food on Shabbos.
All the food was made
Not
before.
They have to
Before-
pay them for the-
You just have non-Jews running around.
But there
You're
should
Jewish,
be,
you're running
if
around.
that's the heter, that you should
There's
get
n-
delivery of piece of gefilte fish before
They
Shabbos.
do a lot of things before Shabbos. What do you mean? You're paying them for their labor before Shabbos,
I
and
know,
then
but if
You're
all
actually-
they did was
you're
labor
actually
for Shabbos,
making-
but they didn't deliver you the food, then you wouldn't be paying
You're
them.
actually making a kinyan.
one
on the
second,
food
we're
once
going to
you eat
get
it on
there.
Shabbos.
There's something
You're
called
right.
Listen, at the end of the
havla.
day, it's a loophole that it has to be done. 'Cause it has
It's
to
not
be
a
done.
loophole.
It's a loophole.
There's something called havla. Not a loophole. It's on the books. It's not a. It's on the books. There's something called schar havla. We'll get there, but
No, but if they only did the work before Shabbos, but they didn't deliver you the food, you wouldn't be paying them.
there's a couple things here. First of all, I'm not asking them to do any malacha. Okay.
Then how are they?
I'm not asking them to do any malacha. I'm not telling them go and cook this on Shabbos. They're warming it up. they're supposed to plug everything in before. There's a lot of rules that have to be instituted.
Yeah, I mean, they do, of course, they have.
So that food is yours before going in for
Mexican
Shabbos.
commercial issues with proper caterers.
Yes.
They have these things that don't cook hard.
Yes, they have
There's all
warming
Mexican
drawers, they have all this stuff. Why do they have to do all these things?
None of that, let's say, there's no,
He's
no.
talking about the
No,
Kenyan.
but
We're talking about the completion of the Kenyan.
We're talking about hiring them. What are you talking about? Hiring them?
You're
No,
talking about the
Kenyan.
the
You're
competition-
sitting
Which
down-
Kenyan?
competition is
What's
when
the
you pay them
Kenyan?
on Friday.
Okay,
That's the
right,
competition.
okay, so maybe.
The
Or you paid on
yeah.
Sunday.
So,
No,
so if
you're
the bar
sitting
mitzvah
down-
gets
you're sitting
canceled,
down on
that
Shabbos.
food is yours.
so what?
You're sitting down
You're
on
eating a
Shabbos.
meal.
You're making Kenyan on that food.
No, you're not.
Of course you are.
No.
How you make
The
it?
person
No,
sitting
Kenyan
is
when
not
when
eating
pay
it.
for it. When you eat it or
Yeah.
not, doesn't matter. Who
Yeah.
cares if you eat?
The-
What if
the
you don't want
food
to eat
is
that
yours
day?
now.
Okay.
You're
No,
cleaning
it's
before
anybody
Shabbos,
eating.
yeah.
No, the Kenyans when you
When are they bringing the food? They're bringing the food Erev Shabbos.
Kenyans don't
Let's say
eat.
I'm not aware of any caterer who brings the food into the building on Shabbos.
No, of course not.
They bring it before Shabbos. So
Then
that
at that point, you're
If
cleaning.
you live on Sunday.
I'm Kona. What's the problem? What's the problem? I don't
Now
understand.
explain to individually to everyone else.
Okay. Okay, we're moving on. We're moving on.
You paying?
What if you don't?
Okay, so there are those
Same issue, for
that
example, if you're going to someone's house for lunch on Shabbos, you shouldn't bring a gift. You shouldn't bring the.
that's a different discussion which we could get to. We could give a share on that as
Unless you
well.
have one on yourself.
There are reasons to allow for giving a gift on Shabbos, but you're right. It's a shiloh we have to deal with about giving gifts on Shabbos. We'll have to deal with that at a different time. Just not everyone agrees with this Rabbi Akiva Eiger. So first of all, we have the Maram Shik. The Maram Shik, source number 6. I don't think we'll read it inside, but he says the Shulchan Aruch tells you else you're allowed to any malacha that a person begins on Erev Shabbos and it is completed on its own on Shabbos, it's mutter. And therefore, he doesn't see why this would be an issue. He doesn't deal with the Yerushalmi, but he doesn't see why it would be an issue to start the Kinyan before and set that process into motion, and that would be mutter.
So that would be setting up a web page before.
Potentially, yes, potentially.
According to him.
Yeah, maybe.
Wait, so does that mean according to Rabbi Akiva?
Rabbi Akiva Eiger said it's a problem when you start the Kinyan before Shabbos, and it takes effect on Shabbos because of the Yerushalmi. The Maram Shik disagrees, and Avnei Nezer, source number 7, he actually says that that it would be problematic because the Torah forbids doing a malacha on Shabbos, not our possessions doing the malacha. So we paskin, it's a machlok is really Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, but we paskin like Beis Hillel that it's not a problem of our possessions doing malacha. So as long as my connection to this item is severed, I'm not actively doing anything, and it happens on its own. I'm a passive participant. My website is doing it. I'm not doing it. Therefore, some want to cite this Avnei Nezer as a heter. However, maybe in defense of the Rabbi Akiva Eiger, the Avnei Nezer goes back and forth, and he says maybe it depends on how this kinyan is working. In other words, if it's a kinyan that needs a human being acting and doing something, then that's a problem. The other case of the that we were saying may be okay is if you set it in motion and then it happens on its own.
Your furnace.
Yeah.
That's your possession.
Yes.
Your possession.
My possession, but I'm not doing anything. However, the website case, the Avnei Nezer makes the suggestion not dealing with websites, but if it needs a person involved, that's different. That's not, there's a person involved in this kinyan, right? The Kohen Gadol and the woman, there's a person involved, so therefore maybe that would be problematic, and the Shulchan Aruch was only dealing with a case where you set it up and it goes on its own, but there's no requirement for a person to be involved. I think there's a lot more to discuss. It's getting late. Let's just try to come to some bottom line here.
I think we
Yeah.
have a separate share on the specifics of what making. I think we're
Making
throwing around-
kiddush.
No, making kinyan.
Making a kinyan.
I think we're throwing around the word making a kinyan. I think we're throwing around very loosely.
It has many applications.
What?
It has many applications. You want to know what are the halachic parameters.
Right?
Okay. I take requests.
Historically,
Yeah.
they didn't make me a kinyan by kedusha, by marriage.
Kiddushin, correct.
Kedusha. You
That's a
have to make
kinyan.
kinyan.
Yes.
So we're saying
The kinyan is not when you pick up the handkerchief. It's when you put the ring and say Harei at Mekudesh Asli. That's a kinyan. Haisha niknes b'shal.
How are you making a kinyan? Okay, anyways, I don't want to go. I'm saying, how are you making kinyan? How are you making kinyan?
Who?
On food for Shabbos. Colin's making food for. Or
He brings it before. I don't understand the problem. It's not on Shabbos.
How are you the Baal
Who?
Bais?
When you pay,
Baal
when
Bais.
you went upstairs, you sat across from him or his son, and
But I
you
paid.
paid
I paid 2 weeks. I paid 2 weeks later.
No, I
So he
think
does
it's the
money,
agreement.
yes,
It's
terms
the
of
agreement.
We're going back. We're going backwards.
Yeah, we're going back.
1 second.
We're gonna leave.
One second.
Hello, I don't understand the difference. You pay something, he gives you time to pay. What's the difference? You're
Yeah,
credit. You signed the agreement.
Guys, let's look at what the Shulchan Aruch says. You don't have to believe. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe me. The Shulchan Aruch, source number 11. Hasochar as hapoel l'shmor ziroim. I'm paying somebody to watch my stuff. Okay. Eino nosein lo schar Shabbos. I can't pay him for the work he does for me on Shabbos. The fikach eino achrayas Shabbos alav. He doesn't have to watch the stuff on Shabbos because I'm not allowed to pay him for that Shabbos. However, if I pay him not schir yom, I pay him schir Shabbos. I pay him per week. I pay him per month. I pay him per year. Then he has an obligation to watch it on Shabbos. Why? Again, like I mentioned to you, there's something called havla. You're paying for other labor, and the schar Shabbos is swallowed up in the payment for the other stuff. So if I have a worker and he's doing work for me, and I'm a caterer business, and I'm paying for them to do other things, other weekday activities or other things, labor, that's okay because I'm not paying for the schar Shabbos. Now, I don't think we have time to do all this. Maybe we'll have to pick up a different time. But the vending machine is a good example that was discussed in the posting before on online websites. So the vending machine is discussed in the Minchas Yitzchak. He quotes the Nod B'Yehuda. The Nod B'Yehuda, he's dealing with a different question. Obviously, no vending machines back then, but he's dealing with a mikvah that's open on Shabbos. Okay, mikvah, you have to have a fire to keep the water hot. So there's two things here. There's using the mikvah was a cost, and then there is paying for the upkeep of the mikvah. So there was the usage and we call it maybe the fee for the service, and then we'll call it maybe what would we call it? The merchandise versus the expenses, paying for the expenses. So the Nod B'Yehuda, he says, if a person the service or the merchandise. He says if a person uses a mikvah on Shabbos, which is a whole other question about that, but we're not going to get into that. But assuming he's going to use the mikvah on Shabbos, he says Tfilas Nashim is a mitzvah. Obviously, you're allowed to do it. So that's what is not obvious, but that's what he says is mutter. And then he says, okay, so should they have to pay for the service of using the mikvah? Well, that's a problem because aren't they paying for schar Shabbos? They only use it on Shabbos. So he says that's mutter because sharei schar ha'etzem vade mutter. Of course, you would have to pay for the upkeep of the mikvah of the trees that were used, the firewood. If you got something from your friend on Shabbos, would you not have to pay for it during the week? That's like he says that as like a throwaway line. 1 second, this is Chaim's case. You got something on Shabbos, would you not have to pay for it during the week? He says, yes, you would have to. How could that be? Imkain rashoy litol schar b'havla. So he says, the firewood that the mikvah uses to keep it hot, assuming that, again, non-Jews, or they set it up before Shabbos, whatever it is, that he says is obvious that you'd be obligated to pay for after Shabbos, obviously. That's not a problem of schar Shabbos. Schar Shabbos would be the fee for using the mikvah. But he says that schar Shabbos, that service is nivla, is swallowed up in the payment of the wood. And based on that, the Minchas Yitzchak says you can leave your vending machine open on Shabbos because he wants to say the profits for the vending machine, obviously, we're talking about mostly non-Jews. Maybe one that wants to even argue even if there are Jews, but let's just say for now it's non-Jews. He says that the upkeep, and this is not quoting everything by heart, but you can see it on your source sheet. Just don't have time. But Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says the same thing, that the people are paying you for the vending machine. They're putting money in the vending machine. You're making money off of it. So he says that's not a problem because that's paying for the upkeep. Paying for the upkeep is allowed, and because based on this Noda B'Yehuda, and the vending machine, like say the merchandise is nivla, is swallowed up by the payments for the upkeep of the vending machine. For sure, Rav Shlomo Zalman says better to close it.
So wait a minute, say again, the profits from
There's two
that
things.
business done on
There's
Shabbos, is that also
merchandise.
that is paying for the whole.
It's paying for the electric bill. It's paying for the.
So why do they still expect you? Like I had my business, I was in whatever. I had to be open in malls, and they expect to be open on Shabbos or whatever. You need to have a Shtar Shabbos. Well, why do we even have a Shtar Shabbos then?
So
we either there's different types.
The Shmir-
you give a shed
That
to a
you give up
non-Joy,
ownership.
a non-Jew, or you whatever. There's many types, but.
So first of all, so Rav Shlomo Zalman says that you should close your website on Shabbos. You should close the vending machine. If you can't,
So that's like
he says it could be mutter to leave it open. The issue becomes, and you can see this. I don't know if we have time for this. The issue becomes if your name is associated with something and it's open on Shabbos, you could be causing other Jews to violate Shabbos. You could be causing other people to think that it's okay. It could be a Maris Ayin problem. Yeah. But on a strictly halachic level, without dealing with all the different problems, and ideally one should shut the website, as I mentioned before. But based on this, Minchas Yitzchak and others, I mentioned this, Rav Elazar Melamed, he comes out, Lakula, even if Rov Konim are Jews, if it's Rov Konim are non-Jews, he says it's if Rov Konim are non-Jews, most people are non-Jews. So I'm going to just find the Lesher. Give me a sec.
Why are you looking? If your problem is if most of your profits happen on Shabbos, the weekday is a big trading day of Shabbos, would that be a problem? Because you know it's not going to.
So he right. So it's a machlokas. He says some maintain websites designed for a Jewish audience must be disabled on Shabbos, so they do not aid to transgressions. Since this is difficult practically, a site owner is not obligated to take them down. After all, they're already on the website. They're already on the using the internet. However, if the site is primarily commercial and most prospective customers are Jews, it means that the owner of the site benefits from Shabbos and he must make every effort to take it down. However, right, he says even comes that he can't do that since those who have access to sites are already desecrating Shabbos knowingly and regularly. Some maintain that the prohibition of aiding someone's transgression does not apply. Messiah Ledvar Vera. However, if most customers are non-Jews, then it will be not necessary to disable it because, as we mentioned before, the payment is not considered a payment on work on Shabbos, but rather upkeep, and it's considered, absorbed in the upkeep. And that's the heter of Shlomo Zalman says. That's the heter comes from the Minchas Yitzchak, which came from the Noda B'Yehuda about the mikvah, and therefore, according to some, the poskim websites are considered like the vending machines, and you have no obligation to shut them down. Obviously, better to shut it down if it has your name associated with it. Some poskim say it's worse. Maybe like having a business open on Shabbos is a problem of putting your name out there, having your association with it. But there could be, I just put it this way, there's room for leniency for keeping your website open on Shabbos, not purchasing the Starbucks. That's a different problem. I don't think we can get out of that. We'll have to give a different shir. It seems very exciting for the Chevra to talk about Kinyanim, about Shabbos and Kiddush. Maybe we'll talk about different shilas that come up in Shul a different time. Okay, we'll hold it here. Everyone have a wonderful week.